thanks a lot to Michael and to, come on, there we go, to Michael and Atheist Ireland for having me here today. We're going to have some fun here. I have some rules I enforce very rigidly when I talk, and the main rule is you will laugh at my jokes, whether you like them or not. All right? I only have one Irish joke, and if you tempt me sorely, I will actually tell it, but not during my speech. It'll be later, okay? So I am from Kansas. I was born and raised in Kansas. I know it's a bit hard to see the map up there, but that's a map of the United States. And in the middle of the United States, in the geodetic center of the United States, is Kansas. Yeah, that might work. That might help. Although it might, he's trying to get a good video too, so who knows. Right in the middle of the geodetic center this is Kansas. And there's three areas that I'm most concerned about. The first one is where I live, of course. And this is in the Kansas City area. Kansas, there's two Kansas cities. There's a Kansas City on the Missouri state side, and there's a Kansas City on the Kansas state side. I live on the Kansas state side, which is in some ways the worst, because we're closer to the Kansas School Board, as Michael noted earlier. Now the next area my thing does not seem to be responding to my, there it is, okay, is Wichita, where I was born and raised. And Wichita is also the place where you may have read about the Dr. George Tiller being murdered, the abortion clinic doctor, murdered cold blood in his own church as he was ushering people in and out. And the murderer was convicted of first-degree murder. And in Wichita, my hometown, a very conservative place, mostly fundamentalists. We don't have a lot of Catholics there in Wichita. They're all evangelicals, if you will. And last, and certainly not least, is Topeka, where the capital of the state is, where the Kansas School Board routinely, about every 4 years, tries to put creationism back into the curriculum, or get it into the curriculum. And it's also where a man named Fred Phelps lives. I'll talk a little bit about him later. Now, Kansas is famous for a lot of things besides the Wizard of Oz. Amelia Earhart, you know her? First woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. She was born and raised in. John Naismith was the inventor of basketball. And Kansas University is where the first collegiate basketball was played, and John Naismith was the coach there. So basketball was invented partially in Kansas. Dwight Eisenhower, Harry Truman, Glenn Cunningham and Jim Ryan were the first and only Americans to hold the mile record. No other Americans ever held it since then. Jim Ryan went on to become a very fundamentalist evangelical Christian congressman in the United States. That's the lower house in the United States, of course. And then we have Wyatt Earp, Buffalo Bill, Bill Cody. I mean, all sorts of interesting people came out of the Wild West of Kansas. Now, here's the really important things. I'm going to give you the really important things here about Kansas. First is it holds the largest ball of twine in the world. And if anybody else gets a bigger ball of twine, they immediately add more twine to their ball to make it even bigger. It's the world, Wichita is the world capital of airplanes. 40% of all the airplanes manufactured in the world are manufactured in Wichita. Boeing, Beech, Lear, and Cessna all are headquartered there. And last but not least, Russell, Kansas is the cow chip capital of the world. Does anybody know what a cow chip is?
I thought I said cow shit.
It's dried cow manure that's flat. And they have a contest to see who can throw them the farthest. It's like a frisbee, only it's a cow chip. Now that's our claim to fame. And there's not much more to Kansas because it's flat as a pancake. You can drive for about 4.5 or 5 hours and not see a tree on the western part of the state. And last is Fred Phelps, the God hates fags fellow. I'm sure you all have heard a little bit about him. He lives 45 miles from my house. It's a small cult. The only people who belong to it are his kids. But we've had a little bit of fame lately with him on the opposite side. His son came to Kansas, spoke out against him. He's one of the 2 or 3 kids that actually escaped the cult. And Nate Phelps came and spoke out against him. 700 people came to hear his speech. It was a really uplifting speech. And then the next day, Nate came with an international film crew from the Richard Dawkins Foundation and filmed us at my house and some other people talking about how we all escaped from religion. So there's quite a backlash coming against our friend Fred Phelps. I am so glad to hear you guys pass the civil unions law. That's awesome. Give yourselves a real congratulations, a pat on the back. We haven't even come close to that in Kansas yet. We're about to elect a fundamentalist evangelical Catholic to our governorship. His name's Sam Brownback. He ran for governor, ran for president a few years ago. You may or may not remember that name. Sam Brownback. He was a fundamentalist evangelical Protestant Christian, and he converted by Opus Dei to become a fundamentalist evangelical Catholic Christian. So I didn't know such things existed, but he holds the record on that one, I'm sure. Okay, in my time, excuse me, in my time today, I want to talk about these things. I want to talk about the viral metaphor that I explore in some detail in the God virus. I really regret that Delta Airlines is holding 30 copies of this hostage in Atlanta, Georgia right now. For 3 days we've been trying to get them to send them to Ireland. I think it's a conspiracy, but I can't nail it. It's Protestant or Catholic. I'm not sure which one. So so I don't have any to offer you here today in person, but we can talk about that later. I want to discuss infection strategies. I want to talk about and identify the guilt cycle. You hear me okay, clear in the back? Okay, good. And I want to talk about sexual control and what role it plays. Now, sex is one of my favorite topics, so we want to be sure and save lots of time for that. And it seems to be a lot of people say that was my favorite part of the talk, was the sex part. So we'll get into that. And then we're going to talk just a hair about political infection techniques, because you've got them. You've got them right here in Ireland. And last, at Richard's request, I want to talk a little bit about escaping religion. We call it recovering from religion in the group that we founded. So, I want to give you a little sample of what I grew up with. Brothers and sisters, we are here to learn about the Holy Spirit. We're here to learn why Jesus came on this earth and how Jesus came down to teach us how to live together and how to call His blessings right here upon us, right here in this room. That's what we're here to do today. I want to teach you how the Holy Spirit moves subtly within us, how the Holy Spirit speaks to us, how to know when the Holy Spirit's talking to you as opposed to Satan. Satan can sound a whole lot like the spirits. That's what I grew up with. Now, it's not exactly like the local parish priest. Our techniques are a little different. Some would say more refined. I don't know. Much better ways of infecting in some way. But I grew up with this. I thought, why do people talk like this? If you saw me out on the street talking like this, you'd probably call the cops, wouldn't you? You'd say, this guy needs to be institutionalized, right, John? Yeah, put him away. He needs some help. He's mentally unbalanced. Well, people stand up, priests and ministers all over the world, stand up and say stupid, crazy things, and everybody nods their head to it. It's an amazing thing. Some of the most illogical, stupid, crazy ideas that ever come out of a person's mouth comes from a pulpit, and not one person objects. In fact, more people come in sometimes. And it got me wondering, how do people's brains get so mushed that they can't conceive and understand the logic, or lack thereof, that's coming out of this man's mouth? Which led me to read a good deal. And one of the things I read, of course, was Richard Dawkins' Selfish Gene, and then, of course, everything else Richard Dawkins wrote eventually. And I just thought his idea of memes, memetics, and ideas as viruses was just revolutionary. It opened my eyes. I have degrees in sociology, anthropology. My master's degree is in religion, because I thought I was going to become a minister, and my doctorate's in psychology. None of those degrees and none of the theorists I read seemed to explain religion, as well as this biologist, Richard Dawkins, living in England. I thought, wow, this guy knows something. I need to study this better. Well, once I did get studying it, as Michael mentioned earlier, I realized Dawkins is a biologist, Dennett is a philosopher, Hitchens is a journalist, Harris is a neuropsychologist or something like that. But when you finish reading all four of those books, and Victor Stenger, you read them all, you know a whole lot about who God ain't, but you don't know anything about what to do. You don't know how to behave around religious people. You don't know how to deal with things like death and dying around religious people. We need to start thinking about these things. We need to start talking out loud about these things. And how do you challenge the religious people in your community? How do we do that in a way that doesn't turn them off? How do we live with our our siblings? How do we live with our parents? How do we live with our children who are religious? And all those things were issues that I thought needed to be addressed from a psychological perspective in large measure. I looked at the mechanisms that these other theorists had, and they didn't explain much. Have you ever thought, why does a fundamentalist Muslim look and sound a heck of a lot like a fundamentalist Christian?